What's going on, everybody? It's your man, DJ Caveman. We're back again for another episode of Inside the Mind of, where we have conversations with folks I know that are super great at what they do, but also we're talking about men's health and men's mental health specifically because, we want to normalize that conversation as much as we can. Don't be afraid of your feelings, fellas. But today on the show, we have a very special guest. We go way back to homeroom.
Yes.
High school homeroom. He is the king of the dream job. My good friend Peter McNerney on the show today. Thanks for coming on, Pete.
Daryl, thank you so much for having me. I'm really, really excited to be here.
I was gonna run down all the podcasts, but I want to save that because we're gonna get into that too.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Peter has one of the best podcasts on the interwebs right now. If you're into like old school cartoons.
Well, with another guy from our homeroom.
With another guy from our homeroom. We got to get him on too.
Yeah.
For sure. But thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate your time today. Like we like to do, we get started. We have our guests kind of give the rundown on who they are and what they're doing currently, and then we'll get into everything else.
Awesome. Well, as you stated at the top, Peter McNerney, just a guy who came out of Providence, Rhode Island. I live in Colorado nowadays. I have an amazing wife and 4 kids, 3 dogs who are a little bit crazy. We live in the mountains of Colorado at this point in time. And I'm currently actually doing just kind of have my own computer consulting business at this point in time, especially around media. I've got a few kind of crazy ideas in the works that I'm trying to get off the ground. But really trying to combine a lot of both the cool technical stuff I've been able to do throughout my career, as well as really tap into something that's very important to me, which is how are we bringing more joy to the world? How are we bringing more creativity? How are we unlocking people's creativity in a way that dispels the myth of saying, oh, well, I can't draw, or I can't do a video, or I can't be in movies or anything like that. I actually am a big believer that we should be democratizing creativity, and maybe if nothing else, dispelling any myth that you have to go to art school, or, oh, I can't do this because I can't program, or I can't do this because I can't write. I really actually feel that everyone's got a story inside of them, and I'd love to figure out ways to unlock that and have those gifts be given out to the world.
Yeah, that's what's up. So with that said, let's dip right into the podcast, because this is a fun situation. You and Mr. Adam Moore, a great friend, have a podcast that I think is absolutely amazing about the 80s cartoon Mask.
Yeah.
And how did you guys get to that point, and why did you choose Mask?
Well,
aside from the problematic situations in 80s cartoons in general, but
let's get into that one too. So for people who don't know, we're not talking about the Jim Carrey cartoon spinoff that occurred. Mask, like many 80s cartoons, is a glorified toy commercial. It stands for Mobile Armored Strike Command. And yes, they're spelling command with a K. It's probably a ruined spelling test for millions of children's lives in the 80s. And the idea around the show, again, it's a toy commercial. It's there's good guys, there's bad guys. And, there's these vehicles and masks that you can buy the toys for, at least you could in the 80s. And this was a cartoon show that Adam and I both remembered. And, in the fullness of time, after we became adults, after we became married, if we have kids, we started to kind of really question our memories of oh, was the main character really a good dad? We don't, or wait, or what's up with all of the names in the show? It's pretty racist stuff. And we decided it would be, we had kind of this fragmented memory. And so this would be kind of a funny podcast if we did this. And so we chatted about this for a few years. And then we finally found a format that we thought could really work well, which was to watch every episode which has been done by other podcasters. The Greatest Generation does this with Star Trek: Next Generation. It's a lot of fun show. It's pretty awesome, and it kind of fit the rapport that Adam and I have in terms of just our interactions, our comedy. Like, we know each other exceptionally well. We've known each other for 30 years plus at this point in time. And so we decided to take a leap. And this was after I had started a separate podcast, Tricky Bit, my business partner.
Which is a complete and total contrast.
Total contrast. This is like covering sort of serious topics in the technical world. But and this was further inspired, I'll say, by my wife doing a podcast called The Ripple Effect, which really is her talking with healers that have helped her at every level, the emotional, energetic, spiritual, physical side, as she has healed from things like Lyme disease. And so it's her interviewing these people. So that was actually the real inspirational core of getting her set up. And then I did Tricky Bits, and then we did Mask. And the idea around it really is it's a show that we actually, it's a lot of fun. I mean, again, it's good guys and bad guys. And Adam is a tremendous writer. He also teaches writing. I mean, he's the head of a department over at Cal State Long Beach, and he is obviously has a tremendous capability around story. And I like to kind of like poke at the logic of this stuff. And so what we do is kind of look back with the lens, admittedly it's anachronistic, but the lens of mid 40-year-old guys who we like to think of ourselves as, much more aware than we were when we were kids, and really start to uncover like, oh yeah, like the main character is a bad dad, or what the fuck is up with so much racism in this cartoon, whether overt or implied, or the sexism that's there. And it's in some ways it's an exploration of just the surface level comedy of it, but it's also, in the long run, us trying to figure out like, what were these influences under the guise of capitalism that really were infiltrating all of our brains as we were kids.
Nice. It's fantastic. Everybody should go watch that show, listen to it. But you mentioned Tricky Bits, which is a complete it's on the other side of the spectrum. You're an engineer.
I am. So I got degrees in computer engineering and electrical engineering. Yeah, so software engineering at the end of the day is pretty much what it is. Okay.
So as a software engineer, what do you do? Like, what kinds of jobs can you have? Like, what have you done? I mentioned earlier that you're the, your resume reads like the dream job resume that everybody makes up when they're pretending to do resumes.
Well, I've been very blessed with a lot of really interesting jobs and coming through kind of a number of different connections. So, to kind of do it chronologically, if you will, coming out when I was in grad school, I was fortunate to be able to, through a friend of my dad's, get connected to working at this really small, investment bank called Spear Leeds and Kellogg, which later got bought by Goldman Sachs. And that was kind of during grad school, kind of a first job of doing database consultancy. And then after I finished grad school, and this is not on my resume, so you'll get to hear some of the fun stuff. I went out to LA without a job and crashed with some family out there for a while, and then did everything from kind of small, kind of just tech jobs to being kind of an assistant at an marketing company. So I actually did a lot of cold calling. So I got to kind of break through that barrier. And then I landed a job at a place called the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is a part of the University of Southern California. And that was where I was doing a lot of games and graphics stuff for military training with the idea, and this is 2004. So the idea was actually can we create these virtual characters that you can have these limited interactions with to help train soldiers for customs that are different from theirs. So someone who's very animated in another culture might, to us as US citizens, seem like, oh my God, like they're going to attack, when in fact that's actually just part of their culture. So the idea was like, can we acclimate people to other cultures in this sort of safe environment to, prevent basically bad situations from happening? So, and then from there, I got to bounce into the game industry. So I worked for Insomniac Games, who nowadays is known for stuff like Spider-Man and I think the upcoming Wolverine game. But back then I worked on their last PlayStation 2 game, which was Ratchet and Clank. So Ratchet Deadlock, technically.
One of my favorite games of all time.
Oh, sweet. So yeah, I got to work there, and then I worked on their first PS3 game, which was Resistance: Fall of Man. But why? So this is I'm out in LA, and the reason I went out to LA, and this goes back to our history as well, Daryl, is that back in high school, and it goes back to me and Adam, we used to make movies, and so we made movies in junior year, and then we made a movie in senior year, which was actually a sequel, a 2-hour sci-fi sprawling epic, for which you were Captain John Franklin.
I was.
You were, and we still have that tape. We still have that, so we'll have to post that sometime. But yeah, Adam and I, we got very inspired to want to go to do movies. He actually, and you'll have another podcast, but he ended up in LA around the same time I did. He was going to AFI for grad school, and then later, began his film career and game career. And I went from Insomniac Games to DreamWorks Animation because I went out to LA to try and do special effects, and I ended up doing computer animation, which was amazing. It was a super great set of people. I'll say this much. I was fortunate because it really wasn't necessarily on my radar to start with. Other people have heard of other places like Industrial Light and Magic at the time, or Digital Domain. These were the big special effects houses. And there's a handful of others. DreamWorks Animation, wasn't as well known, probably still isn't as well known as Pixar. But going over there, I got to meet really a tremendous amount of people who were not just talented, but also just good people. It's just a good culture of people who wanted to make movies, and not just any movies that were geared towards kids. And so it really was this very special place to land at and be able to use and learn my new technical skills, as well as eventually develop leadership skills there. And so it really was the culmination of work I'd done from high school through grad school to actually land in that spot. And what's funny about a dream job, though, and because there's an element to which people will be like, hey, once you've hit your dream job, you'll be there forever. I ended up being at DreamWorks Animation for only 5 years, and it was beautiful 5 years. I don't want to take anything away from it, but there's also an element where it's like, okay, well, I've kind of grown up and as much as possible in this particular spot. And it was right around the same time as I it was just after I had met my now wife. So actually that's a funny story unto itself, because we met in our mid-30s, and we kind of we knew we wanted to be together. We knew we wanted to have kids. And so we ended up getting together and then getting pregnant relatively quickly because we wanted to have kids. Right before my now eldest daughter was born, and the story probably is a little bit too long for this podcast, but I ended up getting into Google and turning them down a couple of times. So that's, again, kind of a separate story. And the reason was it didn't seem as interesting as making movies for kids at the time. But I ended up going over there because of just they kind of, changed the projects I'd be working on, and it was good financially for the family. And this was what I call the beginning of a kind of a lost decade, where, again, to say hey, 12 years ago I started working for Google, a lot of people were just kind of like, whoa, that's amazing. That's got to be the most amazing place on earth. And it's like, still not as fun as DreamWorks was. And it definitely, like, where I'd been powered by this joy that had really kept me going, and it had kept me going into like entertainment media, putting out really good stuff. It got I let it, I should say, I let it get stolen from me, and got caught up in a lot of just the nonsense that is really the corporate world. And so I bounced around a few different projects, ended up moving out to Colorado because by that point in time, we had twins after our first child. So we had 3 kids, and LA was too expensive, and there really wasn't a good point for it. So we moved out to Colorado, and I ended up working first for the office of Google out here, and then I went from there to work at Major League Baseball, originally to do augmented reality stuff. But then it actually turned that it was the same year that the Supreme Court decriminalized at a federal level sports gambling. So then things took a different turn in terms of trying to develop a sports gambling light app. So that was an interesting pathway to take. And then around the same time, like that wasn't really what I really wanted to do. So, and then I was actually in management at that point in time. So I ended up heading back over to Google for, and I could get into the reasons why I left and why I went back. But it was really kind of trying to understand a bit more about the economics of business at that point in time. And bounced around a couple of projects again at Google, then ended up going over to Twitch, which was at that point in time a part of Amazon. So I was there and worked again in management, did a few things until earlier this year when actually I was part of the 2024 layoffs. Ahead of that, because last year I survived. I don't say that I was safe from layoffs, but I survived the layoffs last year. I actually took it upon myself to start a separate consultancy business to try and get ahead of the curve. And now I'm getting to kind of reconnect with a lot of folks that I used to work with, who all of us have this collective ethos, and that we remember when tech, not just tech was cool, but we were doing cool stuff with it. It wasn't an end. It was a means to an end. Whether we were creating a really beautiful movie or a final image or a tool that was useful to people. And so what's fascinating is that a lot of folks that I came up with through the game side or the animation side who've done the tech thing, we are recovering that core, which is that joy, and re-asking the question, how can we produce more joy for the world? So, sorry for the long-winded response.
No, that's fine. Because here's my follow-up question, I guess. I call it the dream job resume, right? And you mentioned when you got to Google from DreamWorks, DreamWorks was pretty fun, but then Google, who for so long has been like the best place to work in the world, you know what I mean, kind of like snatched your joy a little bit. And like, is it like was it a higher stress level, or was it just the work is not the same as working on like cartoons? Cartoons are fun. Animation is fun.
There's an aspect where it's like, these things are fun. It's also that the people that are drawn to it tend to have that same fun. I mean, you can make a tremendous amount of money going into finance, going into database development. And I want to take nothing away. There's some people for whom that is a real joy. And I want to kind of fully always respect that and never make it seem like I'm ever disrespecting. There's some people for whom making machines scale to global levels is a joy. And again, never take anything away from it. And what happens is those jobs can also be incredibly lucrative, especially because there might be fewer people that are going into it and they have larger outsized impact. You're not going to become a multimillionaire or billionaire going into work doing software for the movies. I mean, just unless you created it and can somehow kind of sell it as something separate, it's just not going to happen. But there's, in lieu of that necessarily that giant financial payout that's there is that intrinsic emotional element, which is that, and actually it's beautiful because I get to feel it today, because my kids will watch a movie for where I have a credit on there, and they get really excited for that. And it's a there's something like untouchable about the idea that I have been able to touch billions of lives. They may never know my name. They may never sit through all the credits because it's fucking 15 minutes into the credits before you get my name. I want to be really clear, folks. It's way down past the HP logo. Okay. But to say, like, when I go, going to Google, I was lost for the good first couple of years of not understanding why I didn't fit in. And, there's an element to which, like, look, you're going to be surrounded by, everyone is smart, and there's this academic ethos that's there, in terms of, it's the equivalent of the big dick in the room. Everyone's trying to swing it, except it's like the big brain in the room. So, and you start to try and come up with, like, oh, well, this is how you get promoted. It's like you do this project and you're not talking about the things about how what we're making matters to the world. At least those aren't the conversations I was having. It was more about, how are you strategically trying to improve your career? And on top of that, and this is where the economic question gets in, that I talk about, or I alluded to earlier. One important thing to realize about so much of big tech is that these big tech companies are fucked up in terms of their economics. And I've mentioned this on Tricky Bits before, but I'll recap it here. Google makes a lot of, like, gobs and gobs of money through search ads, and some through YouTube ads, and they're trying to make cloud profitable. That's it. So every other product for Google really is a loss for them. And so what really occurred to me is that I actually understood the economics of what I was doing in games and movies a lot better than I did for a long time at Google, because I'm going to charge you a ticket to watch my movie. Like, the whole point of it, like, there's an economic exchange there. And the way I always like to frame it is the way Disney framed it, which is that we don't make movies to make money. We make money to make more movies. And with Google, they were, like, taking all this money from ads, and obviously they paid well, and they gave back to the shareholders, but they also funded all these projects that had no real business purpose then to it. And when you have that kind of disconnect, between and the business side and what you're doing, I'm not trying to make it, like, crass and capitalistic, but how to, like, if I'm just going to give you shit for free, then how do I know if you really value it or not? And this was, like, I think the core problem I started to run into at Google was that all of this free stuff that they were giving away could go away in an instant the moment the economics of the world turned, if they weren't making quite as infinite amount of money as they were. Okay. And so, like, it started to occur to me that, I'm using basically this business thing as kind of the proxy to, like, giving people value. But because that we had nothing there that kind of, like, showcased that value loop with people, it really kind of became an explanation for me for why I felt so bad. It's just like, I didn't feel right just trying to create these sort of academically interesting things just for my own, just sort of, I don't know. It was basically like academic masturbation at that point in time. Like, it is. I mean, that's the thing. It's just kind of like, I'm going to make myself out to be smart. And that's not, I don't know, just like, it didn't feel good. And on top of that, it's like combined with the same corporate, like, how do I get ahead of my career? So I have so many reasons to be grateful to Google, and Amazon and other places like that. But what I'll say is that it took me a little while to kind of realize how much of myself I let go. because I was trying to fit in with the culture around me. And, I claim responsibility. Like, it's not someone else's fault. That's my fault. That's my responsibility. And that's what I have to own in terms of like my mental health and how I became as a person. But what I'll say is that it's really easy when you're not in that alignment of joy to optimize for the things around you. That it's like, oh, well, it makes sense that you want to make more money. So why wouldn't you try and do X, Y, Z to advance your career? And just over time, I feel piece after piece basically getting taken away until like, it's like, yeah, I'm doing well, but like, what has happened to my soul at that point? And that is, and what I tried to do was, I changed locations and changed jobs within Google and then changed again. And then I left Google and went to Major League Baseball. And that has its own sort of interesting emotional journey to it, where I'll say that it reads a lot like kind of Dune, if you want to understand the structure of Major League Baseball. But anyway, so the point of it is like, for some people, I can imagine from what I've read in terms of LinkedIn posts or whatnot, just working for one of these places and exploring it is enough to be wonderful. From my experience, that disconnect from the things that I love, no matter what you kind of added on top of that, was not enough to satisfy my soul.
I mean, how did it affect like your family life? Being a new dad and having like, you know what I mean? Like you went from like the happiest job on earth to like the fake happiest job on earth, for lack of a better description.
It's a really interesting, sort of line, because so what's fascinating is I was never a father at DreamWorks Animation. And this actually is important because there's a flip side to it, which is like, voluntarily, especially after I became a tech lead of a project that had 30 people on it, I was working a shit ton of hours. Like, this is before I met my wife. I was in a relationship I had a previous girlfriend. But like I was working my tail off all the time. And again, it felt more in alignment, but I never was a father at DreamWorks Animation. So I swapped over to Google, and then I became a father a few weeks later. After I landed at Google, that was when Chloe was born. And so what's fascinating is that I definitely could not have been a good dad and worked the ton of hours that I did. On the other hand, there was this drain on me, which was, kind of the work that I was doing, the commute that I was doing, where, little by little, it did affect my relationship, especially with my wife, detrimentally. And, obviously the sort of financial stresses that exist of living in LA with 3 kids, caused us to move. And then, getting to Colorado, we were able to do stuff like have date nights again and whatnot. But one of the things I think we still hadn't fully appreciated at the time, and we understand a lot more now, is that, once you get married, once you have kids, I think they said this in the original Parenthood movie, like there's no like moment where it's the touchdown, like it never ends, like in terms of the growth. And that was something that I didn't appreciate well, was that, and I want to be really clear, I married the most amazing woman on earth. She is my soulmate. I love her like crazy. And yet, and we knew it right away. And yet still, like the distance of growth between me now and me 13 years ago, it's huge. And I sort of didn't appreciate that at the time, that, inside of work, outside of work, there was still more emotional growth for me. And there was still undoing of, things that I picked up from childhood, or things that I sat as sort of constructs for myself. So the job stuff I'll say that the job stuff didn't help because I hadn't figured out for myself how to kind of detach this identity I had kind of cultivated for my work stuff and my life. And again, I think of that as on me. Like that's my growth that I need to do.
So how did you get to that point? Did you start going therapy, or did you figure out, like, is it meditation? Like, what's in your toolbox to kind of help
Yes.
you?
So
Yes.
yes. Well, what's interesting. So even prior to meeting Jen, so I was in a long-term relationship for it was 5.5 years long with someone else, and she and I, it was she was actually about 8 years older than me, and there was certain things where it's like at first I sort of honestly lied to myself that I didn't think I wanted kids. She didn't want kids. But then, underneath it all, it turns like I really did want to be a dad. But so much of my emotional growth, she and I went to couples therapy a couple years into our relationship to start to figure out why the fuck I couldn't move forward. And then that branched off into individual therapy for me, where I really was unpiecing a lot of stuff from, again, that I'd picked up. And then eventually she and I broke up. But the course of that relationship, the course of that, coupled with that therapy, really got me very clear about what I did want. And so this, obviously I'm like reaching back in time. There's still like the forward growth to come. And when because when I could figure out like this is what I wanted in a partner, and then my wife showed up, it's like, oh my God, there you are. As side note, you don't know this story either, but I told my wife on our first date that I love her. I put all the chips on the table on that one.
Nice.
Yeah, and she didn't say it back to me that date, and that's okay. I made it in such a way she didn't have to. But what I didn't appreciate was the work that still had to come. So for a lot of years, I didn't really have as strong a friendship network. I didn't have a strong a kind of growth network. Jen was actually always really good at like kind of continue to kind of seek out things that, whether it be, her mom's group or Reiki, which I also took. Daryl, just to be really sure, I've gotten spiritually more weird maybe than ever before. You used to be able to nail me down as a pretty dyed-in-the-wool Catholic, and now it's probably a separate podcast for where I'm at spiritually. But
Hey, nothing wrong with that, my friend.
I say no. I love God to death, and there's nothing. But on top of that, actually, it does play into it because, I was part of a really progressive Catholic church back in LA, St. Monica's, and they, it was really a very expansive place. And actually, they did some stuff where it was like, oh yeah, we're doing the Passion of Christ as a performance. And right before I met Jen, I was like, oh, I want to get a little more involved with this church. And I ended up, going out. I became the good thief for this performance, which required me to carry 100-pound cross, literally. And thank God I was working out at the time. And then the next year, I actually got upgraded to be Jesus for the next 4 years.
Nice.
So I've been crucified 5 times at this point. But when we left that, like trying to find another religious community that kind of connected with us was tough. And then we kind of had different evolutions beyond that. But then I'll be very honest, like I got stuck in a rut of not growing and, having this kind of like not pursuing the resources that I should to grow, and getting inside my head and just kind of saying, well, I don't need it, or I don't, I shouldn't have it, or like this, that, or the other thing. And if I'm being, I think my, my parents, they grow to the point they can grow. And, I still ended up working out a lot of issues with each of them, even though one has passed on at this point in time. I would say it was in only the last 2-3 years that I really, and I then thank my wife a lot, because the communities that she got connected with, they provided really good resources in terms of spiritual, energetic growth. I mean, it's forms of therapy. There's a thing called NET, neuro-emotional technique, which really is about getting to the heart of traumas. But starting to do that building blocks, that work. I went to a men's retreat in Costa Rica, and but starting to kind of really kind of like deep dive again with an assertion, with several kind of assertions, like why I wanted to do this. I wanted to do this ultimately first and foremost for myself, so I could become a better person, and along the way, a better person for myself even. But along the way, also become a better husband to my wife and become a better father to my kids. So I've had tremendous reasons to get motivated to do this. And I do believe it happens at every level of the spectrum. I think there's a physical component. I think there's a spiritual component. I think there's an energetic component. I think there's a mental component. And I ended up looking and finding resources to help me out at each of these things. And it's been a tremendous blessing for me. I try to avoid saying the word "you" because I'm trying to get away from generalizations for other people. Like, I can say that this has worked really well for me, and I can't make any more assertions that it's going to be the end all be all for anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. But just the fact that people now know it's out there, it might be something that they can take advantage of, and that's one of the best parts about having these conversations, because I've never heard of, what is it, NET?
Yeah, neuro-emotional technique. And the idea, I'll give a very brief idea. I always butcher this, so people should look this up for themselves. But the idea is that, think of yourself and your nervous system almost like like it's a computer, it's a machine. When a trauma happens, like, we have these very natural reactions to it, and especially like emotional trauma. And that emotional trauma, it gets stored in our brain, it gets stored in our nervous system, it gets stored in our tissues. And what'll happen is that, when the threat has passed, whatever it is, it's like, okay, the threat's gone. But we've still effectively put a little program into our systems. So now when there's another trigger like that, you're like overreacting. And it's like, why the fuck did I do that? And a lot of the idea with neuro-emotional technique, and again, I use this as part of a palette of many things, but one of the great things about neuro-emotional technique is to use applied kinesiology to very quickly find out, like, where is it in your system that this is going on, and try to take the charge off it emotionally, get you neutral to that particular thing. And you'd be crazy of the shit that's come up for me, where it's like, I'll go to a practitioner and it's like, yeah, what happened to you when you were like 6 years old? I was like, well, what the fuck? Like, and it's like, what happened to you 6 years old? And it was like this, with shame or something like that. And it's like, oh, well, this particular incident. And it's like, hey, I like to think of, when I describe this, it's a little bit like the Matrix and Morpheus saying, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to experience for yourself.
Right.
But there's lots of NET practitioners that are out there. I'll admit, I'm talking my wife's book a bit because this is what she does. I don't do NET with my wife because, don't get diagnosed by your spouse. But there's other resources that she's done as well, like contact reflex analysis, which kind of is in a similar vein of using applied kinesiology to find out, what you might need in your system, whether it is something like neuro-emotional technique, whether it's supplements, whether it's something else. And then there's some other stuff that we've gotten into that's more metaphysical, called creative emotional wizardry, which has to do with a lot of foreign energies. So I realize I'm going all over the place, man. From like,
listen, it's all helpful on some level, I'm sure. But we've reached the fun part.
yeah,
Not that we haven't been having fun already. But I'm going to ask you some questions,
yes,
and you just give me the quick answers or the
okay.
first answer that comes to your mind. If you could recommend a book, what would be the book you would recommend?
It is the book that has the worst title in the world. It has the slimiest title, in my opinion. But honestly, I think it's a beautiful book about authenticity if you read it right. The book's called How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I think one of the real things, again, I think it has a really terrible title. but if you read it, it really is, how are you listening to people genuinely? How are you taking genuine interest in other people? How are you finding genuine interest in subject matters you've never encountered before? And I think it's actually a beautiful expression about how you actually connect with people. So if you can get past the title, folks, because it was written in 1925, I think it's actually a really excellent book.
Word. What's your favorite quote?
Oh, I think I mean I actually mentioned this in the podcast earlier, but one of my recent favorite quote. Well, actually, I didn't. This is no. Let me back off. I'm going to use a different quote. I get the Disney quote, so I'll say like people already heard that one. Warren Buffett's partner was a guy named Charles Munger, and one of the things he said was, "Show me the incentives, and I'll show you the behavior." So if you figure out what is it, let's say like, oh, well, if I, pile these bricks up, I get paid more. Well, then I'll figure out a machine to go pile up those bricks. Or, oh, if I want to get promoted, I got to go do these things and these check boxes. And so instead of doing the job of the business, you're doing the job of how you get promoted. If you find out what the underlying incentivization structure is, it better understands the behavior of people because they tend to then figure out, how do I make it better for myself?
I like it. I'm going to use it at some point. This is the most important question. Strawberry Pop-Tarts or brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tarts?
Oh, so as a kid, we were not allowed to have either of them.
Wow.
So I don't know if I've ever had either of those Pop-Tarts before. I know
you're a grown-up now.
I know I'm a grown-up now. I can go do it. Unfortunately, I also know about all the dyes that are in this stuff. So it's like, it makes it a little bit painful. But yeah, man, I'm blowing this question.
Oh, it's okay. You've never had a Pop-Tart. That's amazing.
I may have had a blueberry one. That's probably the only, I think I've never had a strawberry or a brown sugar. I would say in theory, I probably would go with brown sugar is my guess.
All right. And do you have any words of wisdom for anybody who's looking to get into, the computer software engineering situation, or, maybe?
Yeah. So this is an unreleased episode of Tricky Bits, but it'll be coming out soon. Rob and I do a whole show about, do you need to have a software degree to be in computer engineering or programming? And our collective answer that we come in with is no. I actually think this is I think this is actually really important. I didn't get to say this, but I've gotten highly critical of the whole college, grad school, like shenanigans. And I could go on to a different tangent for a while. Another great book is called The Debt Trap, talks about how the fuck we got into this whole craziness. What I think is one of the most amazing and remarkable things today is that, unlike when, we were coming up, all of the knowledge that you need to be a great computer engineer or programmer is on the web. All the tools out there are free. You can go and make your own game for free using Unreal Engine or Unity. You can then publish that on the iOS store or for Android. Like it's actually remarkable. Like, we're not talking about like, oh, like when we were kids, like you had to go to Micro Center or Best Buy or some big box store to like buy the software. And like the barrier of entry to do that was enormous.
Right.
Nowadays, it's open to everybody. And I almost really can't stress enough. It's like, look, the resources are out there to do whatever you want, truly. Like, you want to make an animated movie, you can do that. And I'm not saying it in a pie in the sky way. I mean, literally all the tools you need to do that are out there and free. The tutorials are out there. Like, there is no barrier to entry for this anymore, other than your own imagination and your willingness to learn. And so what I would say for anyone who really wants to go and do stuff in computer program, computer engineering, whatever, is go do it. Like, you know, as I said, like most people already probably have a phone. Most people might have a laptop, but you could go out and buy a $30 Raspberry Pi and a $50 Android phone. And guess what? You can do a mobile game now. Like, it's kind of fucking amazing. Right. And if anything, like what I would tell people is that and we say this again, the spoiler alert for the podcast coming out is that, you know, the best people in the world may not have gone out and got a degree. And the best people, you know, really just were inquisitive and were tinkering and wanted to find this stuff out. And I mean, that's how Adam and I made our movies. Like, we didn't know jack shit about making movies other than press record on a camcorder. And this is us writing up a script. We didn't have the training. We just went and did it, and we figured out stuff. And, you know, the other aspect of, and this is true of so much in life, is that, you know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and you can't plot out every step of those 1,000 miles. Like, I could not have told you that my career was going to turn out the way it was. I couldn't told you that I was going to end up in Colorado the way I did. It really was taking each step at a time. And if someone wants to go do something, it is more possible today than ever before. So I really encourage folks to, you know, take that step, make those mistakes. Don't be afraid. Like, life can be both very short and very long at the same time. And it is worthwhile to go after the things that you love and the things that you dream of.
Word. You did an episode of Tricky Bits that I listened to around AI.
Yeah.
How doomed are we? And is it going to be like the Terminator movies?
I mean, certainly, I go back and forth on this quite a bit because, like, on one hand, the AI that's out there right now, like, I think everyone's losing their mind about, even though it's like, you know what? It's still kind of, it does a shitty human's job in many cases. There's some cases where it's kind of like really cool in terms of the images it makes. And, but at the same time, like, I think it's a little bit overblown. Certainly there's a case where, you know, Boston Dynamics has got that robot that looks a lot like that Black Mirror episode, which is,
man, those dudes are scary over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So certainly it is the case that, you know, we could very easily, you know, create a robot that really runs amok, basically, and does a lot of damage. It's, you know, it is, you know, how do I weigh that out against, like, you know, the fact that we have nuclear weapons hanging over heads every day? I don't know. There's a flip side to it, though, and I think of it this way, and it really also dovetails to there was an X-Files episode that actually covered this a little bit, where effectively it's like another AI run amok, where, you know, Mulder didn't tip, and then the AI increasingly up the level of lethality until finally he did tip. And, you know, part of the message the AI had back is that we learn from you. The AIs are learning from the humans. And Mulder's comment was, well, maybe we have to be teaching these guys better. And so I have wondered about a flip side to the AI question. You know, we're very afraid of it dooming us. But could I imagine, and I can, an opposite situation from the Joshua we saw in War Games, where Joshua thought it was a game and was ratcheting up, about to cause everyone to blow up. And what it learned was that, as it said, it's a strange game. The only winning move is not to play. I could imagine basically us, instead of focusing it on a computer intelligence that was hell-bent on killing us, into one that was hell-bent on saving us. And instead of focusing in on all, and there was a tremendous amount of awful stuff in humanity. I want to be really clear. I don't want to wash away anything, but there's also a tremendous amount of beauty, and there's also a tremendous amount of love. And is it possible that we actually could train an AI to see that? And instead of being the one to launch the nuclear weapons or the killer robots, could it be the one that stops the nuclear weapons and the killer robots? Could it actually be something that could be used to save us rather than kill us? And so I think a lot of it does come down to what we decide as humans. It's really about are we going to accidentally let an AI kill us all? Are we going to train an AI that, we as humans hey, we want to kill all the commies out there, so let's train an AI that does that? Or can we say hey, can we figure out a way of actually recognizing the beauty that is in humanity and doing something to save us? So
I like it. I like that. I like that angle. We just gotta hope that we're not too money hungry or because all the money's in the bad shit as opposed to being in the happy times and the good shit.
But we made a lot of money making fun movies. I'll say that much. So I think there's a way we could bend the curve if we really want to. But you are right. We have put machinery in place, and we've put systems in place that makes war profitable, that makes basically a lot of bad shit profitable. And how can we get beyond that?
Well, only time will tell, my friend. I do appreciate you coming on today. This is your opportunity to self-promote anything you have going on. Let the people know how they can get in touch with you for consulting or
sure
podcasts.
Yeah. So thank you so much for Daryl. It's so good to see you. Like we said before the podcast, it's been about 20 years. I do look forward to where if either I'm back in the Northeast or you're in Colorado to actually see you face to face. That'd be wonderful.
Indeed.
People can find me at pj@mcto.tech if you're interested in contacting us for consulting, especially. You can listen to our podcast, Mobile Armored Podcast Show, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or you can look at our Buzzsprout page. We also have an Instagram page, so Mask Podcast. And then Tricky Bits as well. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all the places, Buzzsprout. And, check us out. Leave us a review. Let us know what you think. And we have a website, mcto.tech. I'll admit I still need to kind of upgrade it a little bit more, but it showcases a lot of what I have done, what my partner Rob has done, who's, if I'm being honest, I know, Daryl, you mentioned that my resume looks like a dream resume. Rob's blows mine away. So, yeah. He built the first Xbox. He's done a lot on the PS3. He worked on the Apple Vision Pro. So, but it's a fun combo. But you can find us there. Looking forward to hearing from folks. Again, check out our podcast. Reach out if you got some. We do kind of a wide range of consulting services. Obviously we have strong graphics and games backgrounds, but as well, a lot of underlying database stuff, a lot of other fun stuff that we've done, mobile development. We've had fun careers. Let's say that much. So check us out.
Very cool. Once again, it's Inside the Mind of. I've been your host today. My name is Daryl, guys. Today we've been inside the mind of Peter McNerney. Hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you follow me on all the social medias. Follow us. We're live on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook all at the same time. It's like a simulcast for those who like words. Thank you for joining us again, Peter, and we'll catch y'all on the next episode.
Take care. Thanks so much.